Hello, welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. You know, over the last 2 years, one of the favorite things that I've got the opportunity to do has been to play and test run a variety of new games, always keeping my eyes open for a indie gem, something created by a single creator, an artist, a sculptor, someone who has no business developing and designing a game, but something about who they are, their personality, their hobbies, their interests, demands that they do. And we found a few of those in the past. Games that I have been honored to cover and excited to bring in front of you here on the channel. And we have a few of those coming down the line. And I am always searching and hunting for those little gems in the rough. Games that I would argue I'd probably never be aware of if I hadn't dedicated my time and energy to doing my very best to seek them out. And Dark Venture, Battle of the Ancients, is exactly one of those gems. If you're watching this video to discover my thoughts on this game, or figure out if this is one that you should back, considering the Kickstarter is closing very soon, and the reality is, this won't be available post-Kickstarter easily or accessibly, the answer, in my opinion, is going to be 100% yes. If you want a unique asymmetric tactics and strategy game, which is easy enough to pick up, but when it comes to the strategy and world and environment and what you're actually doing on the table, is interesting enough to be easily one of the most captivating tactics games I've played all year, well, swing over to the Kickstarter, leave a quack after you take the time to commit to a pledge. That being said, if you're here to find out more about Battle of the Ancients, that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. Battle of the Ancients is going to be an asymmetric tactics and strategy game, and I'm playing on the prototype here, which is going to be on a smaller board, so I've mostly done the two-player head-to-head competitive mode, but there is also a cooperative and a solo mode that you can play as well. It's a 1 to 4 player tactics and strategy game, where you're going to be using one of 5 different unique factions, spreading your way across the board, rolling dice to take your actions, assigning those dice to different types of special abilities that you have, and resolving to upgrade your troops through your own special mechanic, gather items or special abilities throughout the course of the game, and either complete the victory point track or complete one of various different asymmetric scenarios that usually tie directly into the factions that you're playing against one another. This game does away with the idea and concept of giant miniatures on a board. It doesn't apologize for the fact that it has a heavily detailed 80s rock aesthetic. It doesn't apologize for the fact that that this death metal theme carries through into the lore and the flavor. It is gruesome and it is mean in the best of ways. It also doesn't apologize for the fact that it's a little finicky in some ways. I mean, your defense and attack stats and the rulebook that I'm reading through, while not complicated, certainly don't take any measures to apologize for the fact that this is a pieces on the board, shits moving across a map strategy game. And it assumes that if you're digging your teeth into it, you're ready to dig into a game that's going to require you to puzzle and think and adjust your strategy throughout the course of the gameplay. This game has pulled me in for one very specific and particular reason. Well, besides the fact that the designer of the game created a Quackalope promo card without ever asking us if we were interested. He sent us the artwork and then, of course, asked if we could be included in the game, and I said I was absolutely delighted and honored. But the thing that is pulling me back into this, the reason why I'm willing to say it is one of the best tactics games I've played, is because every session I've sat down to play this, I've immediately wanted to re-engage, to solve the puzzle again, to venture back into this world. It's a combination of the art aesthetic, the lore and themes that match up with your characters or units' special abilities, but then also the fact that this head-to-head game, especially in a two-player mode, which is where I have experienced it, this head-to-head game presents a new puzzle and a new challenge to solve every time you re-engage with your opponent. It's just deep enough to allow you to twist and change the strategy that you want to take. But it's also simple enough that your actions don't take a lot of time. You're able to move through the course of the game fairly quickly and effectively, and this dice rolling mechanic as an action selection mechanic is both rewarding and also very, very easy to grasp. So, with that being said, let's dig in a little bit deeper. Let's start with the 4 factions that we're going to be playing as, because that is where the game is going to begin. Like I said, you can either play for victory points, and there is a variety of ways you can score victory points. It is not as simple or clean as wipe your opponent off the map. Instead, it's things like accomplishing your trait's objective, or scoring different resources, or taking out an opponent, sure, but also capturing and carrying an opponent to the edge of the board in order to trade them for one of your own. There's a lot going into that victory point scoring system, and it was rewarding to re-experience because I could find a different pathway to victory every time I sat down to play this game. But the thing that captivates me the most is going to be the scenario system itself. There are scenarios where you have various factions that are landing on the board here, and there's different reasons for them to be bumping up against each other. Whether they're gathering resources to set up defenses, to conquer a piece of territory, they're here to recover a crystal that opens a rift or a portal that they need to summon more of their creatures or to leave this space. There is a thematic reason they exist, and there are asymmetric win and victory conditions that you're both struggling to accomplish, that demand that you run into each other and engage in a little bit of tactics and warfare. But you set the pace of the game. Do you rush forward, leveling up quickly, or do you take your time, set up barricades, or sit by the lake's edge, splitting yourself into pieces? So again, in this game, you're going to be playing as one of 5 asymmetric factions: the ORPAL, the DHARGON, the BOHMERK, and the VARPEN. And I'm sure I got some of those names wrong in the process of saying them. These faction boards are not only going to explain the special abilities and the general setup for each unit or each type of unit, but also you're going to have a variety of different levels, each showing a very simple strength and defense system. You're going to have some special resources like the bag here or some of these items that I can collect from around the environment, and you're going to have one leader, your ancient one. This is going to be the big deity that you can summon onto the board and really do a significant amount of damage to potentially yourself and your opponent. Those deities are going to come with their own special, unique requirements in order to summon them, which is a side project you might be working on throughout the course of the game, or could be your victory condition itself. So, the VARPEN over here, and let's dig into a little bit of the flavor text and then talk to you about how each of these factions are going to operate. The VARPEN. These formidable warriors are limited in number, but are able to transform themselves, becoming more powerful with each mutation. So these are creatures that don't populate the board very much, but if you give them the space and time as you roll these dice and assign your movement or your action results to these characters, to these monsters, they will twist and distort themselves into new, more stronger beings. And if you give them enough space, if you allow them to barricade themselves and secure their defenses, they're almost going to be unstoppable. These units are also able to gather and collect resources from the map. They then turn those resources into barricades which either restrict movement or just set up defenses that give them more control of positioning and require you to funnel into them in order to engage. If you give the VARPEN enough room to grow, they will not outnumber you, but they very well may outpower you. The BOHMERK here. These amorphous BOHMERK surfaced from the depths of the earth soon after the cataclysm. They are able to split into multiple units, fuse back together with ease, and can absorb defeated enemies to grow stronger. Note, the BOHMERK have no water movement penalty. The BOHMERK is this gelatinous, group of organisms. It's modular and can separate itself, meaning, tactically on the board, you might start with one large unit and then begin splitting and growing and absorbing and splitting and dividing again until finally you coalesce into something that is giant and formidable and a creature that no one else wants to face. Along with that, instead of capturing and carrying units, you can actually swallow and absorb them. In fact, that's where you get the nutrients in order to level up and continue re-engaging. The BOHMERK are going to be not only disgusting, but also really entertaining to play as you're parsing out how weak do you make your units in order to populate the board versus when do you capture, absorb, and level up. The ORPAL. ORPAL Gate Masters use rift crystals to create more portals, allowing them to transport their armies of aggressive, unthinking minions through space and time into this dimension. These are going to be distorted, alien-like humanoid creatures, zombies in a way that are controlled by some hive mind-like creature. Very few of them, the Gate Masters, are able to think and rationalize, and they will spawn to these portals and then funnel their units through, using a little draw bag as a core mechanic. You never quite know what's going to stumble through. It could be another Gate Master, a more powerful creature. It could be something that you need in order to unveil your Ancient One, more crystals for you to summon more portals. They'll be able to spawn and collectively move across the map here, always trying to solve the puzzle of getting their Ancient One out onto the board, because once they've done that, once they have a few big rifts, they're gonna be very, very hard to tackle. Finally, the DHARGON. Tribes of the DHARGON are led by elders. When an elder dies, another is grown to take their place. After harvesting ample resources, the DHARGON are able to produce eggs that hatch into more of their kind. The DHARGON are going to be a peaceful, forward nation. They're not interested in attacking you. Instead, they'll skirt around the board, collecting resources, and only attacking or only really engaging when you've messed with them yourself. And when that time comes, they'll be pretty powerful. They have high defense stats, but lower attack stats, and the object of the game, the puzzle for them to solve, is really to lay nests around the board, to start harvesting resources and turning those resources into new of their kind. They will populate by sheer mass and flood until finally they're able again to summon their Ancient One, who is a weapon that you probably don't want to deal with. But even then, the Ancient One is not the most powerful being, but it is incredibly formidable, having the highest defense by far and being just this walking barrier moving across the landscape. And depending on what scenario you're playing, those walking shields or walking barriers could be a real problem for you to engage with. So, on your turn in a game, in my prototype, we've always selected one of these two, setting up a scenario. For instance, the ORPAL and the VARPEN. Coming in on the edge of the board, the VARPEN are looking to secure this bunker as a place for them to establish a new camp, whereas the ORPAL know of a crystal that is inside this bunker. They've decided to re-engage, grab the crystal, spawn a portal, and summon their Ancient One through it. That's the puzzle you're trying to solve. One faction trying to take over and control the land, the other heavily needing to gather resources and summon or do a ritual during the course of the game. On your turn, you'll roll these dice. These dice are going to have movement symbols on them and skull symbols. It's about as simple as that. Your movement symbols will relate to taking actions, moving straight and diagonal, and interacting with the board state. There's going to be locations on the board where you can draw cards. These will be positive or negative. I have had a scenario where I drew a card and a bomb blew up in my face and one of my ORPAL warriors was turned into very, very squishy dust. Your movement actions are also going to be able to be stored and activated for other special abilities. Every card will have a description of what you can spend those movement on in order to upgrade them. For instance, the VARPEN can become stronger by activating some of your movement dice. The skulls are going to be your actions. They're going to directly relate to your own personal special abilities. You're also going to be able to spend them for some of these factions in order to re-roll or do special tasks that lead directly to victory points. The skulls at the early game are not going to be as valuable as your movement. Your movement's really going to be where you're engaging and crossing the landscape, but these will become heavily necessary, and so stockpiling them and storing them up for when you're ready to summon and engage is going to be key. And that's about as complex as the turn of your game goes. You'll roll these dice, assign those dice based off of your player's special, unique faction abilities, and then engage with the scenario, moving across the landscape, picking up items or drawing cards from various locations, following movement restrictions, whether or not you're slower in the water or moving faster along a road, making sure you're respecting barriers and entryways or other terrain pieces that are placed down by different factions' abilities, and you'll engage in combat from time to time. Sometimes immediately and heavily, other times it'll be a slow, plodding thing until you see a weakness where you can skirt in and do a significant amount of damage. The combat is going to be fairly straightforward as well. You can move any multitude of creatures on, engaging up to 2 enemies with up to 2 of your own personal units. When you do engage, you'll be rolling dice based off of your strength and defense, and it's going to be a high-low number, triggering a reroll on a tie. Not too complicated, not too heavy, but you can definitely parse off the math with enough room to allow those dice to shift and adjust the odds based off of how risky you want to play. And then finally, the items and special ability cards that either trigger immediately with an instant action or items that you can hold in your hand. These are going to tie to specific factions, and in a 4-player game or cooperative game, you're actually going to be able to trade and utilize items in a variety of ways. So you could draw a card that is not valuable for you, but might pay benefit to one of your enemies or current allies. And so you're always negotiating the board state, trying to determine what is useful to you for your long game versus immediately beneficial to those that are around you, or immediately harmful depending on what your target is. I really, really desperately want to play this game with the full 4 factions on the board, and this board extends out into larger modular pieces. And the reason being is because I want to see not only how they operate together, but also have the opportunity for a strategic negotiation to happen around the table. I'm looking forward for that moment when the ORPAL and the BOHMERK team up together in order to take down the VARPEN who've leveled up and summoned their Ancient One onto the game state. I want to watch them crush and then absorb him, and then immediately turn to their friend and stab them in the eye, or try to envelop them in this purple ooze. I like the idea of this game, and I not only like the idea of this game, I've thoroughly enjoyed playing it. I was excited to get it back to the table immediately after finishing my first, second, third, fourth, and fifth game of this, and I am looking forward to teaching and getting it back to the table once again. And, of course, it doesn't hurt that there's a Quackalope in it. Now, the Quackalope, if you're interested, since we're getting to that part of the review, the Quackalope is going to be one of these item cards. When you get it, you get a special little Quackalope chit, and that is going to be an ally that you can use to pummel, attack, and engage with your opponent. You can see the full card over on the Kickstarter page if you're interested. And if you've made it to this part of the video, please know that I am also excited and interested in the solo and cooperative mode of this game. While I haven't played them, they do seem compelling if those are your style of gameplays. For myself, the head-to-head combative tactical game is really where I'm going to spend the most time. Oh, and they also, just because I thought this was cool, in the prototype copy I had a package of cards that you weren't supposed to shuffle in until you'd completed a few scenarios. I love that system. Not quite a legacy game, but a little bit of new things being introduced throughout the course of the gameplay. For me, at the heart of this is going to be that scenario mode. I cannot wait to get a scenario book that just tells me all of these stories that I can experience, sets the stage for an interesting encounter. And because this is an asymmetric game, those encounters really are unique and varied. I'm already ready for expansions and extra content and for the core game to get here so I can continue playing it and give you my full final thoughts. Of course, this is a Kickstarter prototype, but for me, like I said at the very beginning, this is being added to the shelf that I'm collecting of games that I don't think I ever would have been aware of if it wasn't for being purposeful and needing to discover them for this channel. To be honest, I almost turned down the opportunity to do a review of this. I wasn't entirely sold on the artwork immediately, and I didn't quite understand the premise that was going on. But then I took a second and looked at the detail, the care, the touches that have been placed into the flavor text and the lore and the world building and the art here on this board, and I decided if the artist had spent so much time designing and building something so unique and special, I wanted to give their game a shot as well. and I am so thoroughly glad I have. So, with that being said, this has been Quackalope's coverage of Dark Venture Battle of the Ancients. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions at all, please leave a comment down below. I don't want to convince you that this game is right for you. That's one important thing. If you made it to this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, I should immediately back this game. Well, do you like tactics games? Do you enjoy the aesthetic and the artwork? Are you excited about the scenario and the way that you face off with each other? Is the storytelling in this game something that captivates you and draws you in the same way that it does me? If all those things are yes, then absolutely you should back this. But if you hesitate on any of those, please take the time to do your due diligence. I know I am thoroughly excited and shining about this one because I really do think it's something special for myself. But I do want to make sure that you spend the time necessary to guarantee that you'll enjoy this game when it arrives. Because what I'd like for the creator is for them to have enough people in love with what they have made that they can't help but create more of it, right? That's always the end goal. So, with that being said, if you do end up backing this, please leave a quack. I mean, mid-campaign video near the end, I'd love to just see a few of those quacks showing up over there on the page. I will be there with you, making sure that I quack back and engage in any comments that you have. Whatever the case, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing, get out and play some games, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.